Welcome back to another segment in the Emotional Mechanics of Attraction series. This is a series where we explore the hidden forces that make relationships between characters so compelling. In this episode, we're looking at why intellectual friction often intensifies romantic connection, both in fiction and in real life. And more specifically, why it's often resistance rather than ease that deepens interest between characters and between people. In an era defined by instant validation and frictionless digital communication, many people find themselves drawn to something a little different. Resistance. Comfort still matters. Familiarity still matters. But it's often challenge, not agreement, that creates a stronger sense of engagement. In both real-life interaction and fictional storytelling, romantic tension tends to emerge less from similarity and more from contrast. We are not always drawn to people who mirror us. More often, we're drawn to people who shift how we think, how we speak, and sometimes even how we carry ourselves in conversation. So to start with a simple idea, what actually happens when someone disrupts the way a conversation normally flows? Most people move through social interaction with a kind of taught structure. A version of themselves shaped by politeness, timing, and the need to keep things smooth. And most of the time that structure holds. But when someone interrupts that expectation, by questioning what's been assumed or not accepting the first surface-level answer, something changes in the interaction. The rhythm shifts. People become more deliberate, more aware of what they're saying and how they're saying it. The conversation stops being automatic and becomes more active. And interestingly, what often comes next isn't immediate attraction, it's respect. In many cases, especially in more driven or analytical characters, or people who are used to thinking independently, interest starts with how someone else thinks, not how they appear. When someone can hold their reasoning under pressure, or stay present in a complex exchange without deflecting or simplifying it away, that creates a kind of recognition. And that recognition can become the first real point of connection. Then there's a very specific dynamic that shows up when someone challenges you, instead of immediately aligning with you. Because when there's disagreement or contrast, you're suddenly not in a smooth, predictable exchange anymore. You have to think more carefully about what you're saying. You're paying attention to the other person in a sharper way, because they're not just echoing you back. And that's where something changes. In normal, easy interaction, your attention stays fairly relaxed. But when someone pushes back, when there's contrast, your attention becomes more focused and a lot more alert. And that change in attention is part of what creates the spark. Because now the other person isn't just familiar or agreeable, they're distinct. They have a mind you can feel working against yours, not just alongside it. That contrast is what opposites attract is really pointing to. Not difference on its own, but the way difference forces engagement. And in enemies to lovers dynamics, it's the same structure. At first, the interaction has friction because there's resistance, disagreement, or opposing intent. But underneath that, you get something else developing at the same time: sustained attention. You notice them more than you would if everything was easy. You track what they say more closely. You become aware of their presence in a way that sticks. Over time, that intensity of attention starts to feel like something more charged than neutrality ever would. And for many readers and many stories, that ongoing tension is what makes the dynamic compelling. In fiction, especially in romance and mystery, this kind of intellectual friction often becomes part of the structure of the story itself. When characters are placed into situations that require strategy, interpretation, or careful communication, their interactions naturally take on more layers. What they think about each other develops alongside what's actually happening in the plot. So trust, interest, and respect don't arrive all at once. They build gradually, through interaction under pressure. This is why slow burn relationships tend to feel so persistent in storytelling, why rivalry-based dynamics stay interesting for so long, and why capable, evenly matched partnerships tend to hold attention. It's because the connection is formed through engagement, not resolution. And this is something I explore across my mystery series as well. I use one of my books, The Grunwald Affair, here as an example to illustrate my point. Lady Emma doesn't just challenge Lord Henry in conversation. She challenges the way he expects people, especially women, to behave around him. She doesn't defer to him. She doesn't soften her opinions to make him comfortable. And she doesn't treat his position or confidence as something that automatically puts him above discussion. She does not do this as a statement of rebellion, but simply because she engages with the world on her own terms, even in spaces he would never expect a woman of her standing to enter. And for Lord Henry, that doesn't just feel unconventional. It interrupts a pattern he's used to operating within. Because in his experience, most interactions in his world follow a certain rhythm: politeness, restraint, a degree of deference, especially from women navigating that social space. Lady Emma doesn't follow that rhythm. So every time they interact, he has to adjust. Not once, but repeatedly. And he can't place her neatly into the category he expects. And that is where the change actually begins, in the fact that she forces him to stay actively engaged with her. He has to think more sharply around her. He has to respond more deliberately. Even when he disagrees with her, he can't dismiss her. And over time, that kind of sustained engagement starts to change the shape of the interaction itself. She isn't simply challenging him in theory, but rather, she is changing how he moves through the world when she's in it. And the same is true in reverse. Her world also changes. Lady Emma is fully aware of the world she's in. She knows exactly what society expects of her, how women are meant to behave, how they're meant to speak, when they're meant to defer. And she's had to push against that her whole life, just to become who she is. So when she meets Lord Henry, she doesn't suddenly become obedient to the rules of his world. She continues to challenge them, including him. Not in a performative way, but in the way she actually thinks and moves through situations. She stands her ground in conversation. She doesn't soften her intelligence to make him more comfortable. And she doesn't step back just because he expects space to be given to him. Even in moments where it would be easier to agree, she doesn't. And Lord Henry notices that immediately. Because it's not what he's used to. In his world, people tend to adjust around him. They read the room. They follow certain unspoken expectations. She doesn't. So instead of slipping into the usual rhythm, he has to stay alert around her. He has to meet her where she actually is, not where he assumes she will be. And that creates something neither of them is entirely prepared for. Because there is attraction there, from the beginning. It doesn't settle easily into either of them. So instead of acknowledging it, they both resist it. They push against it in different ways, through challenge, through distance, through trying to keep control of the dynamic between them. But underneath all of that, what's really happening is that neither of them can ignore the fact that the other is affecting them more than they expected. And that tension between recognition, resistance, and awareness is what begins to shape the connection between them. Not ease, not agreement, but the fact that neither of them can remain unchanged in the other's presence. And that's why this pattern shows up so often in both fiction and real relationships, especially in stories where intellect, restraint, and interpretation matter just as much as emotion. In The Grunwald Affair, that dynamic is one of the underlying threads running through the story, shaping how characters read each other long before anything is ever openly said. In the next episode, we'll explore another attraction dynamic frequently found in romance fiction: forced proximity. Why is it that the people we can't seem to escape often become the ones we understand best? And how can being repeatedly thrown together transform resistance into something neither character expected? Until next time.